time aboard. This is the Miles to Go podcast. And now here's your host, Ed Pizza.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Miles to Go podcast. And what can only be described as a 1980s Folgers commercial, we have secretly replaced my ugly white co-host Richard Kerr with a similarly ugly white co-host Julian Keel.
Right? I can't even tell the difference. And in decaf, that's amazing. Wow.
Right.
That's just a little more hair. That's the only difference. A little bit more. We're talking minuscule.
Minuscule, right. And I can definitely say that there's nothing decaf about this week's episode. Unfortunately, based on some unfortunate timing over the weekend, we don't have Summer and Richard based on various travel sequences. I feel very sorry for both of them. One of them getting to go to Tucson and go to an air museum, and the other one getting to board a Disney cruise ship. It sounds very rough, but here you and I are, and we're stuck with our own ship of sorts wandering in the night, in that Southwest has just dropped an absolute bomb on the general public, and it's big news. And I think the thing I take away from this is it's not just big news to miles and points nerds. This is big news. This is their identity, and it was. I think it came as a surprise to all of us.
Yeah, I first of all, I completely agree. I think it's really changing who that company is and who they have been for decades. And, we can talk a little bit about why that's happening, the various trends in the industry. And of course, Elliot's, influence as an activist investor. But at the end of the day, Southwest is going to be a different airline. And if it wasn't clear before, it's super clear now.
Yes, it certainly is. So a little bit of housekeeping, and then I'm going to frame up these changes, and then you and I can talk about them. And you're a very important guy. I know you've got some other media hits today, so we're going to get you in and out as quickly as possible. But first off, show 571-293-6659 if you want to text us or leave us a voicemail. He is at Julian Keel on all those social media channels. I am at Pizza in Motion. And you can find the show Miles to Go podcast on TikTok and on Instagram, because as of time of recording, TikTok still exists.
No guarantees.
Yeah, exactly. No guarantees. So edit Pizza in Motion if you want to shoot us an email. And so teeing up these Southwest changes, first and foremost, we've already had big news from Southwest. Last year, they announced that they were moving away from their open seating policy. And while all of those details weren't fully defined at the time, it was very clear that there would be different classes of seats in the cabin, even if that meant that there wouldn't be different seats. And so we've got a little bit of extra legroom stuff mixed in there. We've got some preferred seating, and then still some level of, quote unquote, open seating on the plane, and different ways that you access those seat types. I think, generally speaking, and I know you'll keep me honest here based on what you thought, I think we all felt like there were probably other shoes to drop, but I think what was the headline of the CEO's announcement today was one that maybe I didn't think was fully ready to drop, which is Southwest is moving away from their bags fly free mantra, which has been that way for as long as I can recall, if not for the full history of the airline. And so most customers now will pay for checked bags. If you have elite status with the airline, whether that's A-list preferred or A-list, you'll have the option to have a free bag or a couple of free bags. If you buy up in fare class, you'll have the opportunity to have checked bags included in your fare. But if you're buying Southwest's lowest fares, you won't have free checked bags, once this policy goes into effect. So quick stop there just to see how surprised you were by that change.
Yeah, and just also, I believe, just to make sure we're all clarified, if you have the credit card, right, I believe you'll also get one free check bag, which is pretty standard, right? I think listen, there's two ways to look at this, right? From hey, the rest of the industry is doing this and has been for, well over a decade. It's time that and Southwest is clearly trying to make itself a little more like its competitors. Yeah. So along those lines, it's not surprising. The reason it's super surprising is because they swore they were not going to do this. They said
just months ago
that was that the bags fly free was sacrosanct and they were never going to change that. And that was a differentiator. So for them to turn around and just without any warning say, yeah, changed our mind. Nah, we're gonna charge for bags, is pretty shocking. And you have to wonder, well, were they not talking about this? Or did somebody just not say, hey, we should not be telegraphing that we're not going to change it and then change it?
Yeah.
What's up? What happened there? Something changed, right? Something went a different direction for them to suddenly do a 180 on this.
Well, and I think what's also interesting is that when the CEO Bob Jordan talked about this, he didn't just talk about free checked bags. He enunciated 2 free checked bags. So, there's not to try to split hairs here, but he was really specific. And so I think it's a lot harder to walk that back as opposed to saying, Southwest believes in free checked bags, and then today saying, look, we still have lots of ways to get free checked bags. I mean, it's the 2 free checked bag thing is really a very narrow sliver of the airline that we'll get to. And calling them free is hard to say because these are obviously bundled in more expensive fares.
Yeah. Well, and look, when people say, "Well, why are they doing this?" From a financial perspective, it's pretty obvious. Southwest has, despite a lot of people thinking Southwest has lower prices, Southwest has actually been more expensive for a long time than its competitors. The reason being, it bundles in 2 check bags. Now, by being able to take that out of the fare, they'll be able to drop their fares down and make
Right.
them more competitive with Delta and American and United, while then recouping the revenue by charging for check bags. And by the way, they have not yet said how much these check bags are going to be, but I
Right.
would be shocked if it was anything less than the standard at this point, $35 plus per bag.
Right. Right. So there's a couple other changes to go over as well. I'd actually say 3. So first off, they plan to release a new class of fare that they're referring to as a basic fare class. This aligns with the other airlines that have a basic economy offering very similar to the Spirit and Frontier model, where you get a seat and you get not a whole lot else included with your fare. They've also talked about that going forward with new ticket purchases, which I think is a good clarification, that there will be expiration dates on those outstanding credits. For folks who are longtime Southwest fans, you'll know that those credits didn't and haven't expired, and so you can roll that forward. You get a flight delay, flight cancellation. If your price changes, all those things can result in flight credits, which you can use in the future. And then lastly, some what I would call nebulous wording about switching to a more variable redemption setup for Rapid Rewards. And I think what's interesting here is, Southwest already has a revenue-based redemption program. They've had, at least off the top of my head, at least 3 or 4 times where they've adjusted the ratio of points to dollars. So the program has been variable to some degree and also floats up and down with the price of a ticket already. So there's plenty of variability. They're saying that the number of points will change when prices are super high and super low. That's generally not good for consumers, mostly because fares almost always go up as we get closer to departure, and the airlines have done a pretty good job at setting a reasonable floor based on where they think they're going to sell out. So by and large, I would say what the general public is learning today is pretty negative in terms of Southwest's ethos and also the value that customers get from the airline. But I want to take a step back and give you a chance to maybe tell me why I'm wrong.
Yeah, well, so to be clear, Ed, I don't personally think you're wrong. I think everything you just said is exactly right, and I think Southwest is in real danger here, that they're going to lose their most loyal flyers while not really attracting new flyers. So it may end up actually hurting them at least in the short term. We'll see in the long term. But let's
But you have a history. You have a history. For folks that don't know, you
Yes.
were at one point. I'm unmasking your identity. You were at one point the devil's advocate.
I was. When I started here in Points and Miles World, I wrote a column called The Devil's Advocate, where I took the opposite view on truisms of the Points and Miles World. So yeah, let's put the Devil's Advocate hat back on and say, all right, well, what are Southwest people thinking? I mean, right? They're not making these decisions and thinking this will be terrible. Let's do this, right? There's reasons that they're doing it. So let's talk about why they're doing it and how it might make sense. First of all, right, the whole reason that this is an issue at all is that Southwest is underperforming its competitors financially, right?
Mhm.
So you got to do something to turn that around. Southwest has always sort of marched to their own drum and done things differently, and so they're making the decision of, well, we see other airlines that this is working for, we're going to take on more of that model. We've already talked about the main reason to eliminate the free check bags is to get your fares more competitive. And the fact is, most people, when they go to book an airline flight, they are looking at an aggregator to start. They're looking at a Google search, Google Flights, an Expedia, Booking.com, so that they are seeing all of the different airlines running those flights. And the first thing that most people book on is price. And then secondly, convenience. So if you are Southwest and you are constantly being undercut, and by the way, Southwest, also another change in the last year, historically did not participate in these search aggregators, is now not only on Google Flights, but I believe is also on Expedia now. So they are also jumping into that, again, going along the lines of, we're going to join the rest of the gang here finally. If you're going to do that, you can't look more expensive than everybody else all the time. So the only way around that is to eliminate the bundled product and to separate it out. So that's clearly what they're thinking, and that's why they're doing that. The basic economy, same exact thing, right? Your cheapest fares, you want to try and get people to book upward, to upsell them to the next fare. So you're going to offer your cheapest fares with various restrictions. That is, again, what all the other airlines are doing. If you want to look competitive in those search results, then that lowest fare is going to have the same or similar restrictions than your competitors. So again, same thing. They're trying to make themselves look competitive across the rest of the industry. And then finally, when it comes to the loyalty program, just to play devil's advocate, you could argue right now Southwest points are worth about 1.4 cents a piece. They vary a little bit. And as you mentioned, Southwest points have been worth more in the past, and they've slowly brought it down 1.6, 1.5, 1.4. If you go much below 1.4, you're now in danger. And remember, Southwest is a transfer partner with Chase, and Chase with an EV. If you have a Chase Sapphire preferred card, you can book for 1.25 cents per point. Once you start hitting 1.3 on Southwest, why would you ever transfer those points from Chase to Southwest? Why wouldn't you just book direct? It's already, for people with Sapphire reserves, never makes sense to transfer pretty much, because you can get 1.5 via Chase. So my point is that not just about the Chase thing, but that if you are going to lower your valuations again, and over time, right, points are always worth less over time because there are more points and miles being minted and issued. Rather than bring it down to 1.3, which would be the next step, you might as well start varying it and saying, okay, so on high demand flights, it's going to be 1.1, and on low demand flights, it's going to be 1.5 or whatever it might be. Go ahead and start opening up the range so that you are, even though overall you're probably devaluing your program, you're at least providing more value to some customers. So if I'm Southwest, that's probably the way I'm looking at that change as well, without knowing the precise details yet. As we know, we won't really know until we actually start seeing those points prices.
Yeah, I think
how'd I do?
Yeah, I don't believe any of it, but I think we were all really good points.
Well, what's funny is that as the devil's advocate, I always said, once I've got done arguing it, I would say, well, did I convince myself or not? And having just said all that, not really. I just don't think they're going about this the right way. I think they're putting the cart before the horse. But go ahead, we can keep talking about it.
Yeah. Well, I also did want to mention, for folks that maybe don't tune in every week, which I don't know why you wouldn't, folks may not know that Julian's day job hat is the founder and CEO of PointsPath, which is why he has such acute knowledge of the valuation of all the broad spectrum of points and miles for airlines. And so when you talk about that 1.4 cent number, and we're gonna have a little more PointsPath stuff to talk about in a little bit, but when you think about that and you talk about the variability, I think you do bring up an interesting point that almost had me there for a little bit. And I guess if there was a sliver I could potentially agree with, it would be the whole reason you created PointsPath, which is the vast majority of people don't go, well, is this point worth 1.4 cents or 1.8 cents? Their key question is, should I use my points and miles on this or not? And so from a variability standpoint, maybe the vast majority of customers don't care, and maybe they get away with this change because people are buying for other reasons and they just redeem their Southwest points when they have enough for a free ticket. And that's more frequent on Southwest because, they don't fly overseas. And so that the price for a ticket generally tends to be on average less than maybe the big three. I mean, there's all these variables that maybe I could look sideways and agree with that one, but the rest is all just hogwash.
Well, look, here's the problem. This is why, again, I think the argument I just made is probably what they're thinking at Southwest or some variation of it. But looking at it from a more neutral perspective, I think you're making all these changes to make yourself sort of more, fit in and more like the
Yeah.
industry and more competitive on a price. Like, you're still missing two huge factors that your other competitors have that you don't. One is an extensive long haul network, which Southwest does not have. And the second is a first class offering or a business class offering.
Right.
And without those two things, you're really, and third, sorry, without no real alliance, no real partners for your,
I have a fourth too. I have a fourth too,
Yeah.
which is, and this may change now, but they've never been a part of interline agreements. And for folks that don't know what interline agreement is, it's when you get stuck on a Delta flight and your plane breaks, and they offer to put you on a United or an American flight, depending on what year it is and who they have interline agreements with. But typically speaking, for most of our adult lives, there's been the ability amongst the big three to get put on somebody else when there's a problem. And Southwest has always said, yeah, no, we're good. We'll be over here on our own. So, and to some degree, the big three carriers have probably not wanted to sign interline agreements with them either to try and isolate them. But that's another, key element here that Southwest doesn't really have to play ball with.
Yeah. In other words, they're sort of bringing all the negative parts of being a legacy airline and none of the positives. So I would argue if they were going to do this, you really kind of needed to do it the other way around, is start, bringing some positives first. And then, if you want to eliminate it, check bags or whatever, you can say, but we can fly you to, whatever, London or whatever. Now, of course, to do all that, of course, there's major structural changes they would have to make across the airline, the type of planes that they buy, there's the pilot training. That would be a massive, massive change. But effectively, though, they say you attract more flies with honey than vinegar. It's all vinegar right now. It's all vinegar, and there's not really any honey.
Yeah, it's all vinegar. And I think the other thing, just from a philosophical standpoint in terms of how you make changes like this, when I think about this from my day job standpoint, I'm always reluctant to make massive wholesale changes at once, because when customer behavior inevitably changes, it's not really clear why. So we already have customers figuring out this whole assigned seating thing, and Southwest isn't the way it used to be, and what's that going to look like? And we're still, probably a solid 6 months away from them selling those tickets, and probably almost a year away from them flying in that sort of a pay for the extra legroom sort of space. People will be sitting in extra legroom seats before then, but in terms of having all the mechanics in place to sell into those seats, I don't think we really have a good idea of how much that's going to impact Southwest from a profitability and net promoter score standpoint yet. And now we're layering on some pretty massive changes. And so if a percentage of your customer base, trades away to someone else, I'm not sure you'll know what lever to pull to bring them back.
Yeah, though obviously, look, I agree with you on that. I think, doing these changes all at once, it's going to be very hard to figure out what moved the needle and what didn't. There are things you can do, obviously, as far as surveys and things like that. But I imagine the reason they did do it this way is to get all the bad news out. And to be frank, I don't think they've even done a good job of that. This has kind of been trickling out a little bit at a time over the last few months. And then today, even the checked bag news broke first, and then the basic economy and the loyalty program and all that. Even that wasn't done in a particularly coordinated way. From a media standpoint, you do generally want to, get all the bad news out there at once so that it doesn't trickle, because otherwise you end up with story after story after story. But it does, you're not wrong. It does create a business issue of how do you figure out what made a difference?
Yeah, and I'd say, in the remaining time that we have left, I want to sort of talk about this from a business traveler standpoint and then a leisure traveler standpoint, and then I'll get your opinion on one of our 2 poll questions this week, sponsored by the good folks at PointsPath. So first off, from a business traveler standpoint, what I would say is, when I think about the business select and anytime fares, which may be renamed as part of this whole exercise, but previously those fares were, I would say, noticeably higher than the Want to Get Away and the Want to Get Away Plus fares. So as a business traveler that probably flies Southwest, I don't know, 8 or 10 times a year, not a ton, I would say more than half the time I was never buying the expensive fare because it just didn't make financial sense. I didn't need extra check bags. I didn't care about a drink on board or stuff like that. Boarding position didn't matter because segment length is shorter. It was
And to
really
be
more
clear, just to be clear, business like there's no business class. We're just talking about the
correct.
extra
Right.
perks on a standard economy
Yeah,
seat. Yeah. Good. Sorry, I
exactly
just
right.
didn't want to clarify that for people who might not realize.
No, good point. And you know, well, once they started to bundle early bird boarding into some of these fare buckets, it really was just and created variability on early bird boardings. It used to be early bird. I think when I first started flying Southwest, maybe it was $15 when they first rolled it out, but the pricing had gone up a couple of times, and then it moved to variable pricing. So typically, I would just look at the ticket and say, well, here's fare bucket A, and this is how much early bird plus fare bucket A costs, and does that make sense to buy into bucket B? I didn't really value the Southwest points in that equation at all. Certainly, I could absolutely understand that business customers might, but I think like at least in the past, I would say as a business traveler, I didn't see a ton of value in those top buckets for the way that I travel. And I'm curious if you feel differently about that.
No, I completely agree. Now, look, I'm gonna step back for a second and say I don't fly to Southwest. I haven't flown Southwest in gosh, got to be at least a decade, and not because I hate Southwest or anything. It's just number
You live in
one,
New York.
I live in New York, right? So I don't really have a ton of places that I need to get to where Southwest works. Previously, I did live in LA, and then I
Mhm.
would often take Southwest. I don't know often, but if I wanted to get to Vegas or up to San Fran or
Phoenix
something, yeah, Southwest was a good choice. But so I am talking about this from a not at all a loyal Southwest flyer or really a Southwest flyer at all. But in the few times that, and also remember up until about a year ago, I had to go to Southwest to search separately from all the rest of the airlines. Needless
Right.
to say, I usually just didn't do that. So, but I would say I agree. I don't know that they're now up to, I think it's 4 fare buckets, right? The want to
We
get
think
away,
there'll be
want to get
4.
away.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think Want to Get Away will become basic, and then I think you'll
I
have Want to Get Away
imagine.
plus anytime in business. So I think there'll be
Right.
4 buckets.
I would imagine though, but I think there's 4 buckets now, right? Because
There are 4
wanna
buckets now,
right.
correct?
They'll just put more restrictions on want to get away. Yeah. So I think that with that it said, you're right. There's not a ton of differentiation in those higher fare buckets, and they are significantly more expensive. In my experience, when the only time I would ever look at those higher buckets is when the lower ones are sold out. So,
Right.
if the want to get away is already all empty, then you go to the next one. And if it's competitive, which it usually wasn't, then maybe you do it. So I completely agree. Now, with all of these changes, will they be able to differentiate some of those higher buckets in a better way? Maybe. We'll have
Maybe.
to see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah. Once you start getting extra legroom seating, that's certainly appealing to some degree of folks. It's not the extra elbow room for being able to work on a laptop for sure. And so the ability to differentiate with a traditional first class seat with the big 3 carriers or a big front seat with Spirit, that certainly be harder to do. Pivoting to leisure, and I'll frame up our poll questions and then I'll ask your opinion. Poll questions brought to us by the wonderful people at Points Path. Shoot us a reply on either one of these questions via Instagram, social media, email, text, however you want to do it, even in the Slack community if you want to shoot us a note. So 2 things here. I guess first, if you're a leisure traveler following along, how much does this change your behavior? And I would guess that for leisure travelers, checked bags is probably going to be the biggest differentiator of whether you're flying Southwest or not in the future. And then the second question, which I definitely want to get your opinion on as well, Julian, is, what do we think this means for the future of the Companion Pass? For those that don't know, Companion Pass for many years was what I referred to as the single best loyalty benefit in domestic airline travel, which was if you earned a certain number of points with Southwest, or way back in the day, a certain number of flight credits, you got a ticket for the rest of the year for your companion anywhere you flew. And that ticket was essentially free. You paid the $5.60 security fee. And that was for a paid flight or for an award flight. So curious to hear your thoughts on what you think the future Companion Pass looks like. And I'd love to have listeners and viewers write us in as well for a chance to win a Points Pass subscription.
Yeah, I'll even also answer the first question a little bit about, how it affects
2
as
for
a leisure
1.
traveler. Yeah, I know, 2 for 1. Listen, then I'm not even going to charge you. I am not necessarily a Southwest flyer, but I'll take a look at this from that devil's advocate standpoint of what are the Southwest people thinking of this. I
Right.
think they're thinking for a leisure traveler who normally does go to Expedia or Google Flights or wherever it is, who first up till a year ago didn't even see Southwest listed, now has been seeing Southwest listed, but probably at an uncompetitive price. Now that traveler may consider Southwest where they wouldn't have before. There are people out there who have said, I don't like the cattle call boarding. I don't like flying
Sure.
Southwest because I want a assigned seat, or again, who have said that Southwest is always the most expensive option. And I don't check bags. A lot of people don't check
Right.
bags, right? If you're going on a short trip. So it does potentially make Southwest fares more part of the pact where somebody might consider them who didn't before. The question, of course, is at what cost as far as annoying your loyal fans? That's where I think maybe the math doesn't quite work out, at least in the short term. The second question,
before
go
you get to
ahead.
the second question too, though, one of the things that Richard and I talked about when the assigned seating piece came out, from a leisure traveler standpoint, one of the reasons why Richard or I would consider Southwest, frequently for leisure travel as a family, is that, as you well know, on United, Delta, American, unless you're booking very far in advance, it can be hard to get 3 or 4 seats together as a family. Whereas with an open seating policy, I knew that if I bought early board, I was virtually guaranteeing that my family would sit together. So from a leisure traveler standpoint, if sitting together with young kids was important, stuff like that, Southwest had a really good pipeline to cater to that clientele, which has obviously clearly faded away. So I apologize for interrupting you, Devil.
No, not at all. That's a good point. I don't have kids, so that's something I hadn't thought of. But that's a really good point. As far as the companion pass, first of all, there's no way it's going unchanged at this point, right? If you thought if 2 check bags wasn't sacrosanct, it turned out that certainly companion pass isn't. It's hard to say what the cost of that is to Southwest.
Sure.
Whatever it is, I'm sure they would like it to be less, given everything else.
Yeah.
I think there are 2 things. There are 3 different things they could do, and they may very well do all 3. The first is obviously raise the price, right? I think right now it's 135,000 points, qualifying points. I think it's set. I don't remember
Sounds right.
exactly.
I'll double check that while you're talking.
Yeah, but it's expected to go up next year to 150, 175, even 200. Who knows? The second is that they could put restrictions on it. Right now, it is really sort of wide open. If there is any seat available on that plane, you can get it with your companion pass. I could easily see them saying, but not if it's a basic seat, not if it's a basic economy seat, or it has to be in the same fare class that you booked, the cash or points fare. There's a lot of things they could start doing as far as restricting that companion pass. And I think that is a very likely scenario. And then the third thing, and I know nobody listening to this is going to want to hear this, I think there's a very good chance that they are not going to let you qualify for that pass with credit card bonuses anymore at some point here down the line. That has been a very easy way for people to sort of, I don't want to say game it, because Southwest is very aware that people do this and they've allowed it for a long time. But when you're getting 80,000 points or 60,000 points as a sign-up bonus and putting it towards a chunk or combining 2 cars together to get that pass and right away, I would imagine that is not long for this world. But we will see.
Yeah, and just to clarify, it's 100 qualifying flights or 135,000 companion pass qualifying points that qualifies you for the full year companion pass. They do some mini companion pass stuff now, but that's not what we're talking about here. And I am going to take a little bit of devil's advocate with you on that last point. I would just say, well, I tend to agree with you in general. One way I could see credit card bonuses continuing to play into companion pass, if we think about it, much of these changes is going to, in my opinion, dent their relationship with Chase, who issues their co-brand cards. They're issuing less points on certain fare classes. Some of these changes are obviously less friendly, so people may not fly the airline as much, or maybe they're not worried about earning status. Maybe they don't take that last flight to qualify for A-list or A-list preferred now at the end of the year. It is possible that credit card spending, including sign-up bonuses, for some period of time, but while Southwest negotiates their relationship with Chase, whenever their next date is, I thought I heard something that might be next year, but at any rate, it's possible that they might have to flood the zone with some currency to continue to keep the relationship in a positive place.
Well, that's a good point. I guess I will. In fact, now that you said that, I will slightly amend my statement. I said that credit card bonuses for companion pass are not long for this world. Maybe they're a little longer for this world, but I think 5 years from now, we're going to be sitting here saying, yeah, remember when you could get a companion pass with a couple of credit card bonuses? Maybe not next year, because you're right. They're going to have to massage that relationship with Chase for a little while. But I think the end is within sight now of that little maneuver.
And if you're as old as me, you'd say, remember when the back rows seats used to face each other in Southwest, and you used to get a physical boarding card that I think were yellow and orange for your boarding group. And you remember when you used to just need 16 flight credits to earn a free flight on your punch card. So
Oh my gosh, yeah.
that's my get off the lawn moment for here as we wrap up this week.
Yeah, my gosh, I don't even know. Again, I haven't all been a Southwest flyer, so I don't know if I have any old Southwest stories. The only thing is I will be honest, I was never a huge fan of the cattle call myself. And again,
Fair.
that wasn't necessarily the reason I didn't book Southwest. You know, for me,
Yeah.
it really did often come down to price.
Sure.
And I don't check a bag a lot. So for
Right.
me,
Same.
I might very well be the person that Southwest is hoping will book on Southwest that has not been before. You might be looking at them right now, and I don't know if it's going to work, but we'll see. Maybe it
I was
will.
going to say, we're going to schedule you back on the show in 2027 to see if you're booking Southwest.
Yeah, I'm going to have like a Southwest hat, and I'm going to be wearing a jacket. I'll be like, oh my God, man, they're so good.
All right. Well, I know you got to run for greener pastures, but since we teased PointsPath a couple of times, tell folks who may not have heard you on the show recently what PointsPath is and how to get it.
Yeah, if you don't have PointsPath already, first thing is it's free, so definitely go and grab it. It's a browser extension, runs in Google Chrome, Microsoft Edge, and it adds the points prices on top of the cash prices in any Google flight search. So you can see the cash prices from Google. We add all the points prices from the various airlines, and then we tell you for each flight which is the better deal. Should you use cash or should you use miles? Like I said, completely free for the major U.S. airline programs, so no reason to not go to the Google Web Store or pointspath.com, download it, install it, give it a try.
Awesome. Well, Julian, thanks for being on this week. It was great seeing you in person this week at my house. I am going to hit the stop button here, and I'm getting ready to head off to Disneyland myself for the weekend. Safe travels. Thanks for coming on the show, and can't wait to hear from everybody on what they think about these Southwest changes. We hope to have the normal ugly white guy back with me next week to record, Mr. Kerr off to Tucson. But until we upload again, we've got miles to go.
Hey, Ed, you're dumb.